Hello, everyone. Welcome, 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 welcome. Hope you all had a brilliant half term and you're having a great start to your week. Just a couple of things. Remember, we are using StreamYard. So if you haven't done so before, make sure you enable StreamYard in your browser. Otherwise, I won't be able to see any of the comments or any of the things that you're talking about. So make sure you do that. And then if as always, we will be putting I'll be checking out all the comments and stuff below after the video. So if I miss anything, then I will be jumping in and checking in. I've just noticed, you can see my scar on my head. I've been doing bits to my new house, so I caught my head the other day. I've got a nice little mark, but never mind. So for those of you guys that hadn't seen in the group, we did a little poll about extra half-term sessions, and for those of you that might not have done it but are looking into doing it, there's some great advice in there, so go and check it out. But anyway, on to today's topic, on to today's live, which is timetabling talk, we've called it. So having a little chat about timetabling. So timetabling is I think it's can be a logistical nightmare. So what I'm hoping to do is give you guys a few hints, tips, tricks, some things to think about when you are doing that timetabling stuff to make your lives that little bit easier. But there are, like I said, there's so many things that can be taken into account, and considerations. But not only have we got this chat today, but also I've been talking to the guys in the office, and they've also got some great functions and stuff like that coming in V2, which will be able to help you with this timetabling. So hopefully, with the advice that I'm going to be able to give, the stuff that the guys are working in the office, everything will be going swimmingly. So first of all, I think personally, I find it easier to timetable and consider timetabling when you're in your own club, in your own facility. For those of you guys that have to set up and break down for your clubs, there's an additional process, or those of you guys that maybe hire your hall spaces if you're doing other sports. There's other things you need to take into account when you're doing this timetabling. You have to make sure that it's so important that in those instances that you're communicating with the facility or the venue to ensure that you can get in there without any restrictions, or when you can get in there to set up and break down. So for example, I know some of those guys that are in schools during exam time, they might have exam tables put up in the school hall, which you might have to wait for them to take down, or the exam might be at a different time, or they have to set times from external people for that examination. So just that communication, and leisure centres, things like that, do they have bookings either side of you that are going to take time to set up before you guys can get in to that? So those are all things that you are going to want to know before you think about actually thinking about your club and your sport and how you can set up your program. For those of us that are in purpose-built facilities, I think that is so much easier because you have ultimate control over everything that goes on. So I think it's a little bit easier for you guys. You can kind of see what your program is, and it's almost a little bit like a blank slate. But those are just some of the factors, some of the things that we have to think about when we're looking at a club. So what I like to do when we're looking at timetabling is I like to have my overall club structure and my overall progression paths and so on in my head. So I won't go over that again because we did that one already, another live. If you look back on the videos, if you go back to class structure, the 3 C's, that gives you an idea how I think we can structure classes more effectively. And then if I have that in my head when I'm thinking about my timetable, then I know how I can keep my participants and how I can maybe make things a bit more effective in the time slots to go all the way through. And that's from tiny tots all the way up through to performance gymnasts and performance gymnastics. But rather than going over that again, I'll let you guys in your own time go back to that one where it's called the class structure, the 3 C's. I think it's also important to know what your priorities are. Obviously, every club and every individual has a different priority. So, for example, you might be focusing just on participation, and you're a recreational club, or you might want to prioritize performance, and you might want to, excel in performance sport. And by knowing which part is your priority, then you know what your focus will be on when you're looking at programming and when you're looking at timetabling different sessions in at different times. Um, Now, I think my view on this one is that unless you're fortunate enough to have either a very big facility or two facilities, then I think balance is best. I think if you have a very big facility, then you're able to prioritize participation maybe in one area and performance in another area. If you have two facilities, maybe you can have a recreational gym, and then you can have more of a squad gym. And I think those are very easy to be able to do, and you can timetable those um, in their own two entities. However, I think for most of us, and certainly for myself, it's a blended approach. Is the best thing to do. So, for example, I'd like to think of that in my daytime, I'm going to look at my outreach program in my early years because most of my other people are going to be at school. And then from 4 till 6, for example, my priority might be for my participation. So my participants, my recreational program, GFA. And then from 6 till 9, for example, my priority might be squad and performance. So everyone has their own different slot where I prioritize what they might be doing. And then within those little priority slots, you can then think about how you want to program within those different kind of slots. You're almost blocking out separate times. Um, Another good thing I think is always, and I speak about it many times, is collaboration, and it's certainly involving other people, certainly at a discussion stage. You don't want to involve them, I don't think, all the way through to the end final thing, but I think certainly at that discussion stage, it's good to get ideas. But ultimately, each coach is going to have their own priorities and they're going to want the best for their participants. So there's going to have to be someone that oversees that. But it's definitely a mammoth task trying to program a whole gym. So there's no reason why you can't ask them for feedback. What times your squads need to come in? Oh, I'd like mine to come in at 5. Well, you can come in at 5 and warm up, but you'll wreck his priority at that point. And those are the sorts of conversations that you might be able to have. But also, those people might be able to spot gaps. So they might be able to see where there's a little bit of a dead spot. So you might be able to go, oh well, you might say, oh well, I'll come in on a Tuesday rather than a Thursday because there's not so many groups on there, and I'll be able to get on the apparatus better. Often when we do it as a big piece, we get very blinkered and very narrow, and we go down the rabbit hole. And we can't see those things because we're so focused on what we're trying to do. So involving others, I think, is important, but ultimately it comes down to one key individual or one or two key individuals that have a complete overview of the whole program. So when I mentioned about looking for gaps, are there areas in the program where you could have an additional session, even if it's with slightly reduced numbers? So, for example, like we just said, if there's fewer squads in on a Tuesday, but you have loads of people want to do recreational gymnastics, why not put a smaller group on a Tuesday at 6 o'clock, for example? I'm just throwing these times out, but you could have a smaller group of participants in when it's a more dead spot for somebody else, because then you're getting more people through the door, it's helping you increase your income, and you're providing a service to the wider community. Not only that, but if you might not have coaches, for example, why not think about, is there a dance teacher or is there another person in your community which you might be able to ask them to see if they could hire that space or hire that time? We've got at our gym on one particular evening at 8 o'clock, the floor's pretty free. And there's a guy that wants to do some jiu-jitsu and some karate and use that floor space. So we said, perfect, 8 till 9, you can hire the floor. So, that's another way that you might be able to help, utilize that time, thinking about when there might be some free space. Staggering start time. So this is something that I've heard of people doing. I've seen people do. I've never done it myself. However, it's an idea, and I think if it's done really well, it can be really efficient, especially if you've only got a condensed period of time. So what I mean is, so for example, let's say your first session starts at 4 o'clock. And then the way that I've done it is that my first session starts at 4, then my next session starts at 5. However, I could have my first session start at 4 and my second session start at 4:45. One coach warms them up all on the floor for 15 minutes, and then at 5 o'clock, they're ready to go on the apparatus while one coach is dismissing that whole other class. You've gained 15 minutes there. So that session that was maybe, you got one that's 4 till 5, one that's 5 till 6. You've now gone 4 till 5, but 4:45 until 5:45. Then the next one would be 5:30 to 6:30. So without chewing into too much of your space later, you've almost managed to gain an extra class. So you've gained some extra participants. Now, if it's done effectively, I think that's a really great way, especially if you've only got a very small, maybe you've got a venue hire and you've only got a very small space, a small time. You can get potentially an extra group of kids in. Again, COVID restrictions might have a bit of an issue with that one at the moment, but when hopefully COVID goes away, then we'll be able to open up to extra classes and we'll be able to go back to normal. Fingers crossed, touch wood, and all those other kind of things. So I think for me, those are the kind of there's several things in there which are ideas. I think one, when we've got to think about what are your club's priorities and what is your club structure, then not getting yourself down a rabbit hole, maybe involving some other people at a discussion stage. If you're hiring your venue, communicate with other people, making sure that you know when you can get in and you can have the whole time, and then maybe potentially staggering those times and looking for any gaps. They could always, I'm sure after you've done version 1, then you go into the next version, and there's always a way you can improve. So I hope that's given you guys some ideas, some things to think about, and I'm sure many of you have got some great timetables, but it's just something that maybe you can have a little think about and go away with. And like I said, if you want to see our other live, which we did on class structure, then it's class structure to 3 C's, and then jump over to the group and get involved in our poll. Or if you want to see some of the ideas of some of the guys that have done extra sessions during half term, then that's the place to go and have a little look-see. But most of all, I want you all to have a great week, and I will see you all very, very soon. And hopefully lockdown will be coming out very, very shortly. But other than that, have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you guys all soon.